There's something wonderfully primitive about a canoe, like the sound of loons calling. It stirs something from long, long ago, another life you might have lived. My canoe was made by Henry Valancourt of Greenfield, New Hampshire. He's a real master of his craft. There was a long article about him in the New Yorker. He searches the woods for just the right size birch tree and makes his canoes entirely with a Hudson's Bay knife. It looks big and heavy, and people look at me askance when I say I can carry it alone. But it's as light as a basket. It's amazing to think you're only floating on birch bark. In the 1830s, a lot of Americans had an inferiority complex about being such a young country. They thought Europe was better, and I couldn't agree with them less. Look what was handed to them. Imagine being given this virgin country. How beautiful it must have been. Think of the great noble trees without underbrush, the pure streams and lakes, but then we deforested the country so. The trees were the enemies of the people, and the air was constantly full of smoke from burning the immense roots and trucks to clear the land. As a people, we haven't appreciated what we were given. I think Thomas Jefferson would turn in his grave if he could see what has happened, and Andrew Jackson would let out a good cuss. Candles are flattering to an old face. I've always used them, and kerosene lamps. However, you have to watch that there's no draught to blow a curtain into a candle, and warn children not to lean over them. I was as nervous as a cat when my children had visitors, because it's very easy to set your hair alight. Boswell mentions how old Samuel Johnson, who was absent-minded and near-sighted, was constantly scorching his wig. Everyone says my house is dark, but people don't realize how dark old houses were. I love it dark. It's like a nice chipmunk's nest. As a child, it was a great thrill to go out into the cornfield and pick the best pumpkins from amongst the corn stalks for jack-o'-lanterns. We called them pumpkin moonshines because they look like the face of the moon, especially late autumn's hunter's moon, which seems so large and orange-looking. We made a lot of Halloween. Ghosts were supposed to leave their graves and float about and frighten people. But I don't mind ghosts. They are very friendly and delightful things like mists rising out of fields. The most ghostly looking thing I've seen was a moon rainbow. Only once in my life, late in the fall. It was very pallid and phantom-like. People have a rose-colored lens when they look at me. They don't realize I'm human. They don't see the real me. As Mark Twain said, we're like the moon. We all have our dark side, that we never show to anybody. When the nights get long and cold, the cat stays inside and sleeps in an old redware bowl. I keep her for the mice and chipmunks, which I don't like to have in too much abundance. But she's afraid of rats, only having one eye. Cats are more troublesome than dogs to bring up. They really get into things, break china and chase birds, which corgis don't do. They eat more and they're fuzzier. Did you ever read Kipling's Just So stories about the cat that walked by himself? He was just the epitome of catdom, very aloof, very particular, like some people. Last night, I finally got the rat that's been in my kitchen. I can't get over the effrontery of his coming in here with a cat in the house and climbing up on the table and eating apples and pears. I'd love to know how that beast got in here. If you see one, you've got 50, I'm sure. I used to get them with a .22 rifle, but now I just don't bother. I was known as the Annie Oakley of Reading, but I can't see that well anymore. He'd been stealing butter. I suspected Kitty for a while, and then I figured, no, those two marks were not cat marks, and she wouldn't eat pears and apples. So I hid everything and set about my ruse. I've discovered that if you put the trap out 3 nights in a row with luscious bait on it, cheese with bacon fat and raisins, but unset, he becomes careless like any other creature. Then you set it on the 4th night and you've got him. I once caught 19 mice on one raisin, one after the other. That was some raisin. This was a big wood rat, larger than a Norway rat, brownish with a little white on his belly and long, snaggly yellow teeth, like Mr. Samuel Whiskers. I threw him in the fire and cremated him. I've used these dishes all my life. I'd rather use a thing and have it broken than hide it in a box and never see it. That's why I wear my old 1830s frocks. Most costume collectors would turn white with horror. But why have something and not enjoy it? Life is too short not to be enjoyed thoroughly. The reason I have these things, however, is that I've taken care of them, and my family before me took care of them. My Scottish nanny was very particular with the china. She always laid a couple of dish towels in the bottom of the sink, an old copper sink that made a lovely sounding sound when it was filled with water. And then she'd wash the china in that. Think of the people who have eaten from these plates. All the iterati of Boston, the Accots, Thoreau, Daniel Webster. My grandmother was a great friend of Carrie Webster and Mr. Emerson, whom my mother remembered seeing as an old man with a sharp nose and long sideburns. I enjoy doing housework, ironing, washing, cooking, dishwashing. Whenever I get one of those questionnaires and they ask, "What is your profession?" I always put down housewife. It's an admirable profession. Why apologize for it? You aren't stupid because you're a housewife. When you're stirring the jam, you can read Shakespeare. There's an old English saying, "No fruits, no flowers, no leaves, no birds. November." It's a time of the year when you don't have the urgency of the plants and the garden. A time for moving indoors to enjoy home and hearth. All my friends get knitting and quilting urges in November. It's a time to enjoy the pleasures of a fire and a cup of tea. I will quote Henry James from the Portrait of a Lady. There are few moments in life more enjoyable than the hour set aside for the ceremony known as afternoon tea.